So sustainability does have many books that we can use. I have chosen this one after the ones we have seen before. This is, sorry, let's go back to the beginning. This is called Sustainability Science. There are many with this kind of a title. This one says Managing Risk and Resilience for Sustainable Development, and the theme is along these lines: sustainable development, how risk as a concept evolved, and what resilience means, and how we have to approach the world which we have created so far for ourselves. And this is from Per Becker. So let's just look at the content, the way the book is organized. We'll just look at very briefly the introduction. Then it's split into three parts. Part 1, State of the World; Part 2, Approaching the World; and Part 3, Changing the World. So each one has chapters like this: our past defining our present, our sustainability challenges, our disturbances, disruptions, and disasters in a dynamic world. That's the state of the world. In Approaching the World, we'll look at conceptual frames for risk, resilience, and sustainable development. Resilience from the Panaceian to pragmatic. So we'll see whether really there is a panacea or we have to be very practical. The world as a human environment system. So the natural human system, as we call it, is the Earth system that we are dealing with, and we have to constantly understand our feedbacks and deal with resilience, and in that sense of understanding our feedback, especially the unintended consequences, which is what we have right now in terms of industrial revolution, fossil fuel burning, CO2 greenhouse gas, and then the global warming, which is moving faster than we are able to adapt and cut down the emissions. Finally, Changing the World: Science and Change, Developing Capacities for Resilience, Social Change for a Resilient Society, and some concluding remarks. So I couldn't figure out how many podcasts we will have, but whatever they will be, they will be. The first chapter, which is the introduction, goes through some preface on how the book is organized in the mind of the author, but I will skip those kind of philosophical suggestions of the thought process. But we are looking at State of the World, which is in red for good reason, and then Approaching the World in blue, and we want to head to green for Changing the World. So changing the world means changing ourselves or actually changing the world itself. So we've tried to change nature intentionally and unintentionally, and we have gotten bitten. So now what can we do to save ourselves? The planet is not going anywhere. Life is not going anywhere. Many species have survived all kinds of perturbations, including meteorite strikes, volcanic activities, snowball Earths, and so on. And here we are trying to survive after having evolved into very dominant species in the last 10,000 years. So we will look at the part of the evolution through the Holocene and some snippets from before. I have a whole course on climate and human evolution where I go into much more detail on our evolution through the climate history, but here we'll take a brief look at it in chapter 1. Our world, chapter 2. The conclusion of the introduction says our world is in a dire state, and to steer it toward a more sustainable future, we must be able to grasp and manage uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, and dynamic change. We have all of these things. So even if we didn't do what we are doing, what we have done in terms of increasing greenhouse gases, climate has always been changing, and this is what has led to our evolution in many ways in terms of colonizing the world, changing our ways of life, and evolving in different climate zones somewhat differently, and so on. So uncertainty and adaptation have always been a part of our evolution. Complexity is obviously a part of the Earth system. Ambiguity is part of this climate natural human system, and there's dynamic change, which dominated by the plate tectonic activities and orbital forcing. But now we have our own impacts. So this is a truly transdisciplinary endeavor requiring the contribution of various disciplines while integrating them under the emerging umbrella of sustainability science. Although direct conservation of natural resources also is a requisite for sustainability, this book is mainly focusing on sustainability in the sense of protecting what human beings value for our present as well as for our future. Okay, remember our Brundtland definition that we have looked at before. Sustainability is the ability of the present generation to use the resources that are available without jeopardizing the ability of the future generations to enjoy the same resources, which is what we are saying here, right? The concepts of risk and resilience are central for this enterprise and constitute vital frames for all three parts of this book: the state of the world, approaching the world, and changing the world. Okay, so let's start with the let's start with chapter 2. I got blanked out a second there. Our past defining our present. Introduction. We are increasingly appreciating that we are rapidly approaching crossroads from which there are no returns once we fail to choose the right direction. So Rockstrom et al. Have written a lot of papers on planetary boundaries and how some things like nitrogen cycle, biodiversity loss are reaching some tipping points beyond the safe functioning of the Earth system. Not everybody buys into this globally averaged picture, but nonetheless it's clear that we are having major impacts on the planet which hosts us. We may have even passed some of them already in terms of these safe boundaries. This is, however, not the only time in history society has been at such crossroads, although it may be the first time the entire planet is at stake. So we have locally created these, let's say, tragedies for the commons, but now we are doing it at a planetary scale. We have been challenged before and we have prevailed. The question is, if we can learn from our past when understanding our present, I think we need to. Right? So we need to prevail just to survive. Although there are valid objections against mixing up the origins and validity of an idea, often referred to as the genetic fallacy, there are strong arguments for why history matters. Should we understand the history to plan our future, to strategize for the safe, sustainable development into the future? Not everybody agrees on the concept called genetic fallacy, that our history has allowed us to evolve to handle the future. Is this true? One of the more influential of these comes from the great sociologist Ernest Gellner, who does not object against the genetic fallacy in itself, but against how it is mistakenly extrapolated to argue that we do not need to be concerned with our past when assessing options for our future. Gellner advises instead that we study our past in order to understand our options for the future and not prejudge our potential choices. There are two very silly doctrines about knowledge and the world: that we can do whatever we wish and that everything is completely determined. None of these standpoints holds in our dynamic and complex world. Social changes over time is this grammatic mistakes I'll have to keep correcting. Social change over time is instead the result of a combination of choices made in particular historical contexts that influence what choices are possible. It is, in other words, not one necessary mechanism leading to social change, but instead a complex mix of economic, ideological, and political factors. So if you imagine the Industrial Revolution, all the inventions that happened, the fast changing life that was possible leading to better quality of life, which was driven by burning coal and other fossil fuels like biomass. Then we got oil and gas, so we kept getting better and better at energy intensive lifestyles, kept emitting greenhouse gases, CO2, without, well, actually we realized that that was not a good idea, but then only very late in the game in the 1970s we began to realize that this is going way too fast into unsafe territories, potentially unsafe territories. So does knowing our past help in this sense? We look at paleoclimate often to understand the sensitivity of our climate to increasing greenhouse gases, so that we at least know, as we continue to emit greenhouse gases, what is possible in terms of changes in temperatures, what it means for rainfall, glaciers, sea level rise, health, etc., crops, vegetation, biodiversity, other species than ourselves, and so on. So past is always a rear view mirror in which we in which we look to drive safely into the future, right? This chapter attempts to present an overview of our history in relation to sustainability, how we conquered the earth and how we changed the way we understand and interact with our environment and among ourselves. Although such task is daunting, and I'm aware of the inevitability of crude simplifications that may provoke devoted archaeologists, anthropologists, historians, sociologists, I view it as necessary to at least hint at the rich knowledge that these disciplines and others have to offer to understand the core challenges for our present and future. So I probably should leave it here since we already went for about 11 minutes. So that's the introduction to the course, the book, and where we are headed into the chapters and the three parts. So let's come back and continue chapter 2 on our past and our present. Okay.